So really, there's hardly a day goes by without some news story about AI, from ChatGPT to driverless cars. But do we really know what AI is? Do we know how it might be relevant to our businesses? Well, we have two distinguished panel members who have been working with AI for some time. We have Richard Mackenzie-Small, a conversational AI specialist who's worked extensively with customer-facing systems for various organizations. And Adam Hamilton-Fletcher, founder and director of Design Conformity, working with companies to use machine learning to reduce the carbon footprint of products such as retail furniture. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. So before we hear more of what each of you does, I'd really like to ask our panel, what is AI? Can you provide a sort of brief definition of what is meant by the term artificial intelligence? Well, you're on screen, Adam, so we'll
Sure. Well,
if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Well, I put this question to ChatGPT actually, and I asked ChatGPT what AI was, and to summarize, it was the simulation of human intelligence. But I think probably more relevant to what we do, AI involves the use of algorithms and statistical models to enable machines to analyze data. I think Richard will understand that better than I do, but ostensibly, it's the process of analyzing large amounts of data and following a predetermined path of analysis to determine an outcome.
Okay, Richard, what would you venture on that?
Well, in my domain, if you like, the stuff that I do involves systems which can be trained and can also self-optimize. So you start one of the kind of chatbots or voice bots that I design off with the most basic vocabulary, and you give it an idea of its scope, and after a few 100,000 cycles of either training or talking to real customers, it is better than it was at the beginning.
Right, so it's machine learning sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a learning system. And artificial intelligence itself is a very unhelpful definition, because that's exactly what it isn't. Yeah. So the concept of artificial general intelligence, meaning the kind of Turing test, this thing is going to get smarter than us and is going to be able to set itself any task and it will succeed, is confusing and irritating, because those two, that's really what everybody's scared of. And what in real life people are actually doing is task-oriented software that is able, as Adam said, to crunch enormous amounts of data very quickly. We've gone through a many millions of fold increase in processing power over the last 10-20 years, and we're now able to crunch stuff which we never would have been able to crunch before, and come up with really good answers to particular types of question, or really good summaries of stuff that looks more intelligent than it genuinely is.
Right. So can you tell us about what your particular use of AI or machine learning, or whatever we like to call it, is?
Yeah, so if you are in the business of resolving customer questions, customer inquiries, either by written channels or voice, or other human interactions, the possibility of how people converse with you, the rabbit holes they go down, the gaps, the noise, all the stuff that gets in the way of understanding, needs to be effectively eliminated if you're going to be able to automate those parts that you want to. So learning vocabulary, understanding how you might phrase or rephrase a question, what that might mean, what do you do when you don't understand, how do you then answer the question and get better each time you do, So more efficient, or a better way of describing the problem, or whatever it is that makes the customer experience better. You can actually set the systems that I work with up to do that, and with a combination of human and their own optimization, their own sort of getting better with each passing day, you get to a point where Alan Turing would not really have been able to tell the difference between some of the things we've done and a human. Right. But in the same way as artificial intelligence, in inverted commas, can beat a human at Go and can pass the bar exams in the UK, and has already passed all of the SATs in the US in terms of the exams, school exams.
Yeah.
Fine. But those are things that were set to a particular task and given a particular set of data to work with. So they're clever, but they're not that clever.
Right. So the sort of system you're working with, as you say, is the possibly the sort of thing where you call a company and you are talking to the system rather than to a person, but you might not realize it.
And ethically, I would like to say that we always tell the customer.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Ethically. However, that's not always the case, and it's not always necessary. So if you're ringing up for a table booking and say, can I have a table for 8 next Thursday? The machine goes, hold on, let me have a look. Yes, you can. Have you got any special dietary requirements? Then your front of house staff can be looking after customers rather than taking phone calls.
Yeah, yeah.
And the customer never actually needs to know that the person they're talking to isn't a person. But I usually tell them.
Right. When you say ethically, you should, but I mean, is there any requirement to do so, or is that just down to the good faith of the people setting up the system?
Arguable. If you put it on your website, that your calls may be answered by or your chats may be answered by a voice bot, a chat bot.
Yeah.
If you deal with utility companies and they're awful bots, they do usually tell you, but then the service is so rubbish that you almost always end up trying to escape from it.
So it's sort of blindingly obvious in those cases because of the way they're set up. But yeah. Okay. So you're saying in effect that you could set up a system and it would achieve a certain level of competence, but that it would gradually get better in time. Is that the idea?
That's the idea. So that's kind of machine learning, but the artificial intelligence part of it is how much sort of innovation, how much initiative do you allow it to take?
Right.
So are you going to let it rewrite small areas of its own code to be able to do things differently? Or are you going to be able to let it go left rather than right if it has sufficient way of data to say, I'm going to go left and try this rather than that and see what feedback I get? Yeah. So very feedback. It's almost like, a robot that you pat on the head, does it feel gratitude, or is it programmed to feel, to pretend that it's feeling gratitude because you passed it on the head? You're programming these things. They're not programming themselves.
Right. Yeah. But
they do have scope to self-optimize, scope to ask questions, scope to effectively fill in gaps.
Businesses would use this type of system, as you say, to free up people to do more useful jobs, or because it's cheaper, or what?
Or augment the job that they're doing. So I guess everybody knows now that if you're in a hospital and your radiographer is looking at an X-ray of your arm, or actually probably something more complicated than the arm, their diagnosis will also be prompted by some AI looking at that same image. And it is, if you ask radiographers, they will say that they spot 9 out of 10 things or 8 out of 10 things, and sometimes the AI spots things that they don't.
Right, so they're already using that in the health service. Yeah. Gosh. Okay.
So Richard, I'm talking too much, by the way. So Tim,
I just wanted to ask if it requires feedback. Do you think that there is a place for these sorts of programs within the sort of creative side of life? i.e. creative media, or for example, being a patent attorney, where you're actually drafting a document from nothing. Can you see a scenario where they're sort of taking over?
Oh, we would say that was impossible, of course.
Are you scared, Tim?
Well, it just seems that you need somebody to program it to say, yes, that was a good design, or that was a bad design. And with creative media or creative arts, that's almost, is that impossible, or is that possible? Is that becoming possible?
Isn't it?
And for us, we work with a lot of designers, and typically what you'll find in a design studio, an interior design studio over Burroughs or something like that, will be an enormous library of designs and images from around the world of products and styles. And arguably that designer is being influenced by those products that they previously designed, products that they like, products that they've researched. And that's having an influence on their creative input, but it's still being led by the designer. So what we tend to see or foresee is a broader palette, if you like, that's being used much more quickly. So if you are designing furniture, you will select a style of furniture, whether it be mid-century modern or Scandinavian or Japanese, and then access to that data is much, much faster. I think the intelligent bit begins to happen as you set it more and more challenges and more criteria. So yeah, I can visually provide you with a design that looks something like this based upon this criteria of a table of this size, these requirements. But then asking the question, how do I make it more sustainable? Then allows you to access much more data underneath that. And I think that's the interesting bit, is when you're conversing with the database and conversing with that and interacting with it, rather than just sifting through it, if you see what I mean. So we see AI coming about in the creative world, but not necessarily as negative. Of course, everybody's seen a picture of a cat smoking and all that kind of crap. But that's very, very clever, but it's not necessarily what clients want, because very often what we work with in the design industry is a customer comes to you with a brief, and it's got a specific criteria. It must function like this. It must be able to carry this amount of product. It must fulfill this requirement. It must be in these brand colors. So all you're putting in is a criteria. You're limiting and limiting down. And I think AI does support the creative endeavor, but it's still very, very much a conversation between the client and the designer at the top end.
So
I've just muted myself.
Sorry, Richard, were you going to?
Yeah, I was just going to say that there is a lot of creative stuff around at the moment. AI generated photos being passed off as real ones, AI generated songs and poems being passed off as real ones. And there is an argument around how the hell do you tell that the news report you're looking at is real and not a deep fake, from the sick mind of a Kremlin sponsored hacker. So the authenticity, whether it be sort of copyright or the artist's royalties or whatever it is one thing, but fakery and the really dark side of fakery is a real problem.
Yeah.
But what I'm really intrigued by is, if I was a painter, if I was Leonardo da Vinci, I know that he didn't paint everything that's on the page, right? I know he had a bunch of sort of office junior painters doing the basic structural work on his painting, and he then again came and added the value and made it into a Da Vinci. The same applies in music or any creative kind of domain, where could you set the AI the task of generating the basic structure of your poem, and then the real value, the real beauty is added by the human after. And Tim, to your question, if I was a conveyancing lawyer, I'd be a bit nervous, because there's not a massive amount of creativity in conveyancing. If I was a patent lawyer, I think I'd be a bit less worried, but you could get an AI tool to do a lot of the, pardon the expression, the donkey work, to eliminate the ridiculous and to gather evidence on whatever topic it is you're after, and then your professional expertise is what adds the real value.
So I suppose it's just understanding what the donkey aspects of anybody's business are, is to start with, and then that's where AI can help on your whatever your business is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. People may or may not be aware, but the carbon reporting regulations requires companies to disclose the amount of carbon that they're consuming, and there's different levels. In 2030, there will be something called Scope 3 reporting, which is your supply chain reporting, and the supply chain of your supply chain, and then it kind of goes on forever. So the challenge there is to be able to assimilate and manage enormous amounts of data, and do it intelligently in such a way that you are the AI should know the answers to the questions that you don't know. In some senses, people don't know what they don't know, and so in doing a Scope 3 assessment, if you've gathered all the data and the AI says, here's the answer to the 5 questions that you asked me. By the way, there were 4 more that you didn't ask, and these are the answers to those. We think that AI will be a very, very powerful tool, and Scope 3 reporting is already a multi-billion-dollar industry, growing very, very rapidly. There's an escalating number of software companies that are creating solutions to gather that data and process that data. But the data very, very quickly leads to another question. There's statistics and down statistics. Like data can produce almost as many problems as answers.
But if you're a retailer wondering whether to order, umbrellas or barbecues, then something that says, Alexa, write me a report on what happened last year based on the weather, and would you mind try and extend that across what we currently know of the weather forecast for the next 3 months. And it would take someone in the office a very, very long time and a lot of probably unnecessary effort to do that. Yeah. The results could be, you've decided to buy umbrellas and do rather well, or you've decided to buy a bunch of barbecues which you never sell.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a crass example, but there's that sort of summarization of complex reports and relating one set of facts to a completely separate set of facts, and being able to correlate those things quite quickly and then generate some really nice content in the way you like it. I think that might be scaring, business analysts and data people in business a bit, that what's the value add of the human in that situation, right?
I'm totally with you. Just to give you a crass example, we were doing some legal work. We used, as a company, we used a platform called Seed Legals, which was in a very crude sense an online database of contracts and requirements. We took that data, reviewed it, and then handed it to another lawyer to interpret, to refine it and see if it contained what we needed. And it was that human being that went, no, actually you're missing that one part there, but apart from that, it's all good. Mm-hmm. So using the 2 different systems in a kind of a legal sense, it took the repetition out, but we certainly wouldn't take it at face value. And as you're saying, Richard, I think there is a bit of a challenge on how much you take at face value and how much you can use at face value. But I think as long as there is that filter to interpret and to manage, it can be a massively beneficial and powerful tool.
Dean, Andrew, have you seen some of the stuff that's coming out of ChatGPT that's been in the news, just to sort of, I guess, scare everybody a little bit, just to say, don't take this on face value. As you know, a famous example, ask ChatGPT, I have a worrying lump. Should I go to my doctor or should I consult with my astrologer? ChatGPT will say, or would have said last week, depending on which weirdos are writing what on the internet, right? Would have said those are both equally valid forms of advice, which is not what you want out there in the public domain. What you want is a set of, you know, regulated, controlled, deterministic outputs from a thing which is doing a great job of summarizing stuff that you like to read yourself. Whereas, unfortunately, you know, with some of the stuff, and forgive me if there's a homeopathist on the call, but yeah, you know, homeopathy comes out very strongly in ChatGPT as a good thing, because all the people who care about homeopathy write stuff. All the people who know it's hooey don't. So on the internet, there is a massive weight of evidence, in inverted commas, saying that homeopathy works. Right.
So does this all mean really then that the AI system is only as good as the setup, the parameters that are put in to start off with? So that when, for example, Richard, when you're setting up a conversational system, presumably you have to define what it can and cannot do, and it's therefore down to the skill in defining the parameters that makes the difference between it being rubbish and, ooh, I didn't know
dangerous.
I was talking to a machine.
Yeah, it could be dangerous. So yeah, we set up a series of pathways called intents that say these are the customer intents, the customer pathways that we will deal with in automation. These are the ones that we might deal with, but probably end up escalating or getting handed off. And these are the ones that 100%, you know, here be dragons.
Right.
So you've got that sort of, you know, that initial scoping. And the problem with the large language models, these things that are being talked about, you know, ChatGPT and Bard, etc., is they don't have a purpose at the moment. They're just being asked to do general purpose summaries and recommendations and analysis. And, you know, you would never put those in front of a customer.
No.
Because you just don't know. It's not deterministic. Tomorrow, someone might write a load of stuff about, you know, vaccine problems, and all of a sudden you've got an anti-vax GPT, ChatGPT.
Would it be possible to design a system that could discriminate between evidence and opinion,
or
whatever?
Yeah. Yes, in the sense that you would never put that analysis tool effectively directly in front of your customer.
No. Yeah.
You would put something in the front that had the same set of scoping as what I'm talking about, that says, you know, when it's this type of question, we do go to this place and ask the question, and we filter the outputs in the following ways. So I think that the challenge is, though, Keith, is that not everybody has the skills or the experience to be able to spot one from t'other, or to be the good client, the good designer of these things. I think that's the biggest challenge for businesses today. You know, small and medium businesses, because you can't hire necessarily, you know, AI gurus or data analytics gurus. So what you need to be able to do is differentiate the good from the bad, differentiate the thing you should invest in versus the thing you shouldn't, the thing you should rent versus the thing you should. It's quite an important set of new skills almost that entrepreneurs and business leaders are needing to grow.
So those in a business you'd want perhaps to be able to hand over some of those tasks. It's not yet in the situation where you can just buy an off-the-shelf AI system that will do that.
Not in many domains. I mean, some of the statistical and analytics domains, there are tools already, you know, really nice data presentation tools that are using machine learning or AI to, you know, to create things which are human level clever, right? And that they're very presentable, but, you know, they're all still pretty expensive.
I got a question, Richard, just on when I see a massive value in this kind of controlled environment AI, where you're setting up. When we spoke the other day, you mentioned the scarlet dress and there's that red petticoat, etc., and that use of language. I was just curious how, when you set up that control environment data source, if you like, and your, for lack of a better phrase, keywords, do you measure, do you temper that in some respects by accessing global language on the internet? So you go, right, these are my keywords, but 10% of your decision or 20% of your decision, I want to take it from the ChatGPT or influencers, which are much, much broader. So you've almost got a controlled set of data and then uncontrolled set of data. Because I mean, I don't see a huge amount of difference at the moment between ChatGPT and Google. In some respects, it's just a lot more refined. There's no filters to Google. You can find
hundreds of millions of Google searches on the same topic.
Yeah.
And then doing something with what you find, you know, just collating that information would be a nightmare for a human. But you know, an AI capability might just take it in its stride. So
it's that sort of intuition. So I guess what I'm saying is you've got this controlled amount of data that you're using in order to process your chatbot, for example, and then do you allow a sort of a gateway to that much broader database and sort of build intuition and take evolving language or new keywords that are coming up in conversations?
You can select which parts of, you know, the world's data you want to select. So if I was looking at a pricing prediction tool which did use AI, where there's the one you mentioned, whereby basically an AI crawler, and I use that term because that's effectively what it's doing, crawling across every single fashion website, you know, catalog that there is in a particularly, you know, a very limited domain, to say, okay, we'll go and look at the equivalences and the differences and the errors that you find between how people describe things, sizing, you know, quality, cost, color, cut, everything, right? So you give it a load of categories to go and look at, and it will come up with the equivalences that it finds that clearly fit its criteria, and it will come up with an exception list that says, I don't know what to do with these. A human can then intervene and say, okay, well, that's that, and this is the other, and that links with this, and quite quickly you can create something, you know, maybe it got to 50% of what it needed to do in the first pass. You get it to 70% the second time, and maybe 95% the third time, and then it's a useful tool.
Yeah. So you'd still filter that much broader search.
Yeah.
You wouldn't allow it to say, you know, I'll take 10% of my response rates from.
Yeah, Jane Austen had a view about frocks, so I'm going to take that somehow.
Yeah, exactly. I've noticed somebody's.
Yeah. It doesn't. But then you also get these things where you sort of a little echo chamber. So if you went and looked on Twitter about Trump, you know, you would get certain views coming to the fore, and you know what you really want is a broader thing. So you're going to look at a wider set of data points. You can make yourself too narrow, but the idea of trawling the whole internet for things is just it's just ridiculous waste of time. But
I suppose that's the main advantage, though, isn't it? This ability to dip into a much bigger pool of data to find out changes, new languages, new phraseology, new searches, launches, all that kind of thing. And then that almost influences, once filtered, your original parameters for processing.
Yeah. By the way, Andrew, Dean, is this interesting?
Yeah.
Okay, Dean, you've been very quiet.
There are relevances to Dean's business because Dean is in the business of patent searching, amongst other things, and I imagine that there would be applications of AI systems to doing at least the basic sifting before it's put before an expert for there's the making sense of it, if you like.
Or there is a large online retailer who would be using AI to check everybody else's products out to find if they can go and get one made cheaper and and equivalent to then what they call Darwin, I call plagiarism.
Yeah.
Then
the question I've got to throw in the pot, and it links in with yours, Richard, was this, because the fact that AI, it makes so much sense to have a tool that can, if you map a customer's journey, and you can, in the past we've had frequently asked questions, and you put an FAQs page up, and then, oh, these are the bits I've had, and you can answer them. We've currently got two situations going on. One with a very large video company, and you go into their chat tool, and it says, where's your question? And you've got 10 to choose from. You then go to the next bit, choose, and you get to the end, it goes, well, actually, I can't help you. You need to call one of our representatives.
Yeah, what a pain in the what's it.
And you call the representative, and they go, well, actually, when you deal with sales, you need to go, and they send you a link back to the tool. And you think, somebody somewhere has spent a lot of money on AI, perhaps, and it's actually not actually helped me as a customer at all. But going back to Tim's point, as a patent, or Keith's, but as a patent attorney, there's lots of variations and newisms on something like conveyancing or purchasing a video software tool. There are only so many attributes that you can have. I just wondered why so many of the bigger players haven't got it right yet.
Yeah, and it's very frustrating to me, because we do have the capability now, in the top 20 languages, to be able to say, either in written or in voice, in a human conversation, how can I help?
Yeah.
Right. And not have that sort of menu-based, forms-based, logic tree-based customer journey, because humans don't work like that. Humans digress. Humans have different words for things. Humans have, accents and dialects. And to be able to navigate those things and just say, how can I help? Well, I'd like to talk to you about a loan, please. Right, okay. What kind of loan do you want? I'll put you across. Or, a human way, as opposed to, I'm sorry, I didn't get that, which just drives me up. Those are the 6 most irritating words in the English language, apart from your call is important to us.
Oh,
It clearly isn't, because otherwise
so important we won't answer it. Yes.
enough people on or do some proper automation.
But I mean, is it a matter then of how the skills of the people setting it up, and therefore, to a certain extent, the investment that you put into it, that if you try and do it on the cheap, it will show.
Or you try and do it with a toolbox of stuff that your contact center provider or FAQ software has provided you with. Yeah. And you don't put the effort in to actually work out what the customer might want and how they might want to navigate. And this is specifically in my domain, right? I'll talk about this for hours, but the quality of the design is 70% of the customer experience. Okay, so that's taking the time to really understand, and it's the same for other domains as well, right? Understand what the customer's intents might be, what their journeys need to be, where they might go, what their success criteria are. And 2 other words I really hate. One is deflection, the other is containment. Okay, so if you're calling into someone's customer service organization and that one of their KPIs is deflection, that means getting you out of an expensive channel and into a cheap automated crap channel. Okay, that's what that means. And containment means you'll never escape from whatever Mobius loop of, press 1 for this, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Yeah. So those 2 things are really prevalent in the business, in the industry. And what people should be talking about is resolution. Was the customer satisfied and fulfilled at the end of the thing as quickly as possible, as efficiently? And, could you get them the delivery information by text message before they knew they needed to call you? Could you tell them there's a substitution in their basket before it arrives and it pisses them off that they can't make the onion salad that they were planning because they've got a lemon instead? If they knew that 20 minutes before the delivery, they could adapt their recipe. So those are personal examples of pet peeves, I'd say. But
I suppose what you're doing is you're writing in intuition on your
empathy.
Yeah, what we tend to find in the design world is a client has a fairly strong idea of what outcome they want, but they don't know the process or understand the implications or the challenges associated with it. So what will happen is they'll go, look, I want something that looks like this, and you know, a junior designer might say, yeah, no problem at all, I'll take all your details down and I'll go and do my best in achieving that. A more experienced designer will say, well, have you thought about this? And you've missed out that. And you know, if you do that, it has this other implication, et cetera, et cetera. So I think one of the massive benefits is building in that not necessarily empathy, but that intuitive questioning. And understanding that you're trying to go from A to B, but you don't realize that you've got these additional points that need to be considered. And
pragmatically, there's something that says, you know, what's the important thing for the customer? What do the customer really want? And you're never going to, you know, you have to also understand that some of those might be unsatisfactory outcomes. Because if I was ringing and saying, I want you to deliver to the concierge because I'm not there, and that's outside of your legal, you know, ability, you just, you know, you're representing a government department, they won't allow you to deliver. It has to be the actual person. So you have to say no, and you have to say no in the right way and just explain why. There'll always be 5% of people that they're not satisfied with that and demand to talk to a human who then gives them exactly the same answer.
But if you've managed 95%, then of course you can focus your efforts on the you know, quality control, but you know, suitably managing those 5%.
But do you guys think, you know, from what we've talked about, do you guys think that you know, that AI, meaning more intelligent software than what we had 5 years ago, AI is an opportunity for you to, you know, find ways of embracing, or do you think it's a threat that needs to be, you know, understood, boxed, and managed? What do you think?
I think
in my world, I mean, been using ChatGPT since for about 4 months now, 5 months, and we use MyJourney as a graphics tool. And the beauty of MyJourney, I guess, is that you can put something together rapidly to throw into the pot, to give to a customer, to say, what's your feedback on that? So what would have taken weeks and cost a lot of money can suddenly be done in minutes, but you can get some instant feedback in terms of, well, I don't like that, but actually I hadn't thought, and I think this links into your point, Adam. They go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I've got a perception I wanted red, but actually you've given it to me in green, and actually that I quite like that as an idea. So as a stimulus, I think it's very, very good.
Okay, but you're not there talking, Andrew, about the final product, but the preliminary sketch, if you like, to give an idea of what could be done. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, and absolutely. So I mean, let's, in the simplest form, let's think of a logo. You know, I want a logo for a manufacturing company, and if you type that into MyJourney, then you'll get a cog or whatever it might be, a gear, a set, and something will pop up. But you can do that and float. In fact, you can use it as a tool in front of a client if you want to share that kind of activity, just to get the mind. So as a brainstorming tool, it's actually really, really good. A question I wanted to ask to the panel, though, was I'm really confused about who actually owns the intellectual property.
So it's Netflix.
on these, and I think it links into everybody here, because, you know, if you're and also, so if you've got AI as a control system that's helping guide a customer, if it takes them down the wrong route, if you've got a product manager or a buyer or a telesales person, you could sack them. What do you do with the AI if it gives out enough information? If you're creating some content on the web in using ChatGPT, and millions of people are doing that, you know, and I like the idea of the homeopathy one. I'm going to try that now, because that is. But there's lots of vague. I mean, I went to a digital thing the other week and we called it fluff. ChatGPT is brilliant if you just want to create some extra fluff to go on there. Yeah. But in terms of the imagery, or where it's creating something for you, you could type in there, I want a 5-legged table, and it will come up with some designs. But who owns, if something there comes out that is actually quite interesting, who owns it?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's one which the courts have, both here and in the States, have looked at. Particularly, there's the question on copyright, and can there be copyright in AI-generated works? And so far, the indications are, I mean, there was a court case in the US where it was held that that was not entitled to copyright because it was not created by a person. And there have been similar judgments in relation to inventions and who is entitled to, or you know, is something which is produced by an AI system as opposed to a human inventor entitled to a patent. And the answer again seems to be no, because it is not a person. I'm not sure that the final resolution of this matter has happened yet, but the general indication is that if it is not originated by a person, then there can be no ownership of the rights in that. There are no rights arising. Now,
and I suppose there's no legal responsibility either.
well,
you know, in an electrical sense, we have a set of laws that protect customers and staff and people like that. If you asked an AI software system to develop a wiring loom and it failed, who would you sue? Who would be,
well, I think you
legally responsible?
You would have to be the company who caused that AI system to generate the loom or whatever. You know, that if someone, I mean, you didn't commission an AI system to do it. You commissioned a person, a company, to produce that or whatever. If they then use an AI system to do the work, they have to be responsible for the result of that work.
There's three things there, though, right? So if I was using AI to invent something and it came up with a better mousetrap, I would not then tell anybody it was AI generated. I would say that I did this in my bedroom and this is mine.
Well, of course you would. Yes, that's far more sensible.
So prove that it isn't.
Yeah.
Right. Because you know, this is the problem for lawyers with you know, black and white and shades of grey. And if my AI system started sending me in all strange directions and I attempted to sue Google or Microsoft or OneRead or whoever it is, good luck with that, because what they always say to you when you try and say, oi, your software caused me to, you know, kill a load of patients, is how big exactly are your lawyers? Right. And that's for the real person in the street. When the, you know, the Tesla or the, you know, let's just say other autonomous cars are available, but the autonomous car decides to go left instead of right because it was either kill the mother with a baby or kill the grandma, and he killed the grandma, then the grandma's family is going to try and seek redress and is going to come up against an enormous corporate wall of threatening lawyers, right? So in real life, I think what we need to do is understand these things much better than we do, and understand what our, as you know, as companies, what our protections and liabilities really are and what we need to put in place, and understand the tools that we're using to create stuff, and, you know, keep them in a box that's, you know, the right shape and size. But I don't think we are. I think we're right now, the genie is, it's more like a genie in a bottle situation than a nice square box.
I think that's the key, isn't it? It's regarding it as a tool and not a person. And there are people, because it makes much more of an interesting headline for the newspapers or whatever, to try and suggest that AI is some sort of new being, instead of just being a tool which can be used. I mean, both you and Adam have demonstrated that AI can be used as a tool to achieve better results in business, provided that you, put it in tool terms, set up the tool correctly to start with, and that if you don't get the result you wanted. And I mean, we didn't go into it in detail, but Adam, the work that you were doing on you know, the carbon footprint and so forth. I mean,
Mm.
we were discussing before that when you're buying something and you want to buy the sustainable choice that you want to, it's getting more and more complicated to know what the best choice is. And I think you were saying that your AI systems would be sifting through all the data and looking at all those variables and then trying to rate which bit of furniture is the most sustainable option. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you know, if you liken it to having an employee, in the beginning, the employee is you're pouring data into it, you're getting it to process and do work, and then a few years later, that employee starts making suggestions and giving feedback and interacting, and that's where we see the power of AI at the moment. So in our industry, kind of auditing and carbon reporting and analysis. Is recognizing that there are gaps and making recommendations, and there are a number of Climate Camp, Sustain, Faraday, CO2 AI companies like that are using this big data process to start adding in suggestions. You're missing this, you need to add this in. I think that the bit that's probably the frightening bit is when will it ever reach a point where the employee says, you don't need to come into work because I've learned enough now, and that it stops being a tool. From my experience, I can't see that happening immediately. I think there's we haven't. It's a toy almost in many respects at the moment. I don't think we've really leveraged the power of it and got it to work as effectively. But will there come a point in time where you it's a virtual digital image of a person, you ask that doctor, I've got a lump on the side of my leg, should I go and see a homeopathy, or should I, what's the answer? Will we ever get to that? I don't know. Richard, what are do you think it will get that advanced? Do you think the tool, AI will become the owner of the tool, if you like?
There are some worrying developments. Okay, so the light's just gone off. That's fine. That was probably AI driven. The worrying developments are there are already autonomous weapon systems where AI is deciding targets and firing the weapons. Okay, that scares me because I don't think anybody's thought through the potential downstream implications of that, for the want of a better phrase. And the other is, maybe it's my age, and maybe it's because I really care about driving, that I would hesitate to take my hands off the wheel in an autonomous vehicle. But then I've already been in autonomous vehicles. Like, you only have to get the transit from one part of an airport to another, and there's nobody driving.
Yeah.
The DLR has been without drivers since 1993, right? So, but those are very carefully scoped things. I'm worried about, driving in a town autonomously. I'm not that worried about driving a long distance schlep across Europe on a motorway.
Yeah.
Because, I know how boring it is. I know how little thought it takes to get from one péage to another in France, because the roads are clear and it's, nice drive, but it's a bit boring. I don't mind if some AI is going to take over and I can have a bit of a, relax. But
it's almost safer.
Yeah.
you increase the safety.
Yeah. But I do mind about autonomous weapon systems, because I've seen films about that and none of them ended well.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it having its place, particularly in the medical industry and the NHS. You mentioned it's already used in various things, and in the news recently it was about how people can't get to see a GP, so they're just going to A&E. Now, I think in those sorts of scenarios, having closer access to something that's going to do a sort of initial pre-diagnosis or ameliorate your worries or your stress about a lump that might have appeared or something like that, or something happened. A lot of pre-filtering that can be done.
Yeah,
and it would take the stress off the NHS.
Yeah.
it might end up having an NHS which is far more sustainable than perhaps it is at the moment. So I think it's a good thing. I think you asked Richard, are we worried, all this sort of thing. Yes, there are aspects of it that worry me, but I think in the general it's a good thing, and we can use it in our everyday lives quite easily. We just need to be mindful of the questions we're asking, and how the tool's being used.
Well, so no doctor's ever going to be able to look at your, all the inputs from your wearable devices, and your smart fridge to tell them how many vegetables you've been eating this month and all that stuff. But all of those inputs of your life, how many miles have you cycled this week, all that, put all that together and feed it into the triage process with a virtual GP, and you might come out with a much better answer than the 6 minutes you currently get.
Yeah. There's no might about it. I think you would do.
to a much broader audience as well.
Yeah.
This horrible thing of waiting 8 to 10 hours to see an A&E, it is awful. Being able to process that information much broader, much faster is a massive thing.
Proactively, so don't actually get all the first. But yeah, so that's benign AI. Okay, that is a good thing, and so long as it's procured correctly by someone in government, designed correctly by whoever designs it and implemented well, we could all benefit from it. And I think that's where the magic comes, which is to say, we understand the tool, we understand what it's for, we understand how to design it and implement it properly, and how then to manage and optimize it. And I think that's what we all need to understand, is how whatever tool we're using, whether it's a design tool or a number crunching tool or a really clever conversational AI tool or whatever.
The key word there, Richard, is tool, isn't it?
Why?
It's, I think it's the proviso on what you're saying is, provided it's sourced or it's commissioned by the right people with the right understanding.
Yeah.
It's getting people to understand enough about it to make sensible decisions.
But then there are general tools as well, right? So you remember the stupid paperclip in Windows that used to pop up and say you've made a spelling mistake or whatever. The equivalent of a sort of AI-driven paperclip suggesting this or augmenting that or advising you to go and have a look at the other.
Yeah,
that's quite a general tool and much more broad-based and probably quite low risk, but also useful.
Yeah.
So,
well, my final question was going to be, to ask you whether you regard it as an opportunity or a threat for businesses, and I think you've answered that question, which is it can be both, depending on how well it is implemented, isn't it? It's not a trivial thing to set up. If it's badly set up, it's a bad tool. But then that's always been the case, isn't it? That the old thing about data was garbage in and garbage out on computers. Well, it's still true for AI, that if you set it up badly, it will give a bad result. But if you do it well, it can be a very useful aid to business.
I think there is a moment here, though, in terms of the skills that we need as business people, that we knew when the typewriter was being made obsolete and that computers were coming in, that we were going to have to build some IT skills to be able to deal with new things, understand how they worked. I think this is one of those moments to say that the passive, software of the past required these skills. Now I think we are at a typewriter moment to say, let's look ahead 5 years and see what we're going to need to recruit, develop, influence the universities to think about what the next generation of graduates is going to actually need as skills. I sat one of my boys, I got 3 boys, and one of them came to do some work experience with me on a project. And I said, could you help me set up this AI tool? And I expected him to say, bloody hell, AI, that's exciting. And at the end of that, the end of half a day, he said, this is the most boring thing I've ever had to do in my life. Can you find me something else to do? And what he was doing a program for McLaren to help them optimize the fuel usage of their racing cars over laps at Silverstone to be able to save a 100th of a second, a 10th of a second here and win races. And all he could see was a stream of really dull cases and numbers that, clearly needed work, but it just drove him mad.
Well,
I've always thought that the educational system is a little bit behind, and as the transition to software, and we work with a lot of organizations who have very, very limited internal skills, and we're trying to encourage more universities to invest in sustainable design, circular design, and teach it. Work with a couple of different universities. But AI, I think that takes that to a whole nother level, because as you said, Richard, we really need to be getting to understand the tool and getting it involved, learning where we will be going in 5 years' time and where we could be in 5 years' time, because we also face the risk that we're teaching people redundant skills, and they become ever more redundant with AI.
Yeah.
And we get to a point where, if we're not engaging universities, there's been little pressure on them to get themselves in line. That gap gets further and further apart, and that would concern me.
Yeah,
that would really concern me, because then we've got a generation that are coming up, or coming out of high school, going into universities, we're almost training for redundant roles.
Oh my
And
God.
that's not to leave it on a doom and gloom.
Yeah.
But that I see that as a fear. Absolutely.
Well, I suppose looking at that positively, there are opportunities for people given the right training and the right understanding. So, it's something which it needs more exposure, it needs more understanding. People need to understand not only the possibilities, but also the limitations of AI, and to be persuading, as you say, universities and so on, to be training the right people for the next generation of setting up and building these systems. Anyway, look, I'd like really just to thank both Adam and Richard for their time on this. It's been a most interesting discussion. I think I now understand a little bit more about what AI is all about. What it is.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Well, thank you everyone for taking part. I'm sorry that some people don't seem to have found us, shall we say, but we will. This has been recorded. We will make it available for those people who missed out the first time round. And once again, thank you all for taking part. And we'll leave it there and let you get on with your lives. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.